In the year AD 43, the Romans invaded Britain. Landing on the Kent coast, over the next decade, the Roman army moved throughout the land, taking much of the south of England and Wales. At the time of invasion, Wales was made up of several tribes whom each faced subjugation from the powerful Roman army. In AD 48, Ostorius Scapula, then governor of Britain, launched a campaign against the Decangle tribe, who inhabited northeast Wales. By taking this area, the Romans put themselves in a good position to launch further campaigns deeper into Wales. A decade later, Governor Suetonius Paulinus launched 2 successful campaigns against the Silures in the south and then against the Ordovices, a tribe who held power in mid-Wales. These 2 campaigns meant that the majority of the country was now under Roman rule. Paulinus then set out to take the island of Mona, known today as Anglesey. The island of Anglesey is situated off the north coast of Wales. It is separated from the mainland by a stretch of water known as the Menai Strait, which is in parts up to a mile in width. The inhabitants of the island in AD 60 would have been made up of the survivors of the recently subdued tribes on the mainland and members of a mysterious native priestly class known to the Romans as Druids. The Romans would have known well the stories and tales told by their elders about the Druids. Julius Caesar's account of them in Gaul would have left a strong impression on the Roman people. Caesar writes of the Gallic tribes regularly appeasing their gods by making human sacrifices, which would not take place without the presence of a Druid. The Druids were philosophers, judges, keepers of natural and celestial knowledge, and acted as intermediaries between the gods and humans amongst the Celtic society. Caesar tells us, however, that the Druids were exempt from military service, but they were an integral part of the force that stood in opposition to the invading Roman army on the banks of the Menai Strait in AD 60. The Roman historian Tacitus tells us that the Roman soldiers standing on the banks witnessed an opposing army with a dense array of armed warriors. Tacitus describes women dashing between the ranks of men dressed all in black with dishevelled hair, conjuring up imagery of the Furies, suggesting to the Romans an otherworldly influence. Tacitus describes the scene. All around, the Druids lifting up their hands to heaven and pouring forth dreadful imprecations scared our soldiers by the unfamiliar sight, so that, as if their limbs were paralysed, they stood motionless and exposed to wounds. Frozen with fear at the sight that stood before them, the Roman soldiers were urged out of their stupor by a rallying cry from their general. Tacitus tells us they bore the standard on, smiting all resistance. The general Paulinus had flat-bottomed boats built to cope with the shallow waters of the Menai Strait, and once ashore, the Roman force burned the villages on Anglesey and the Druids' sacred groves, which were, according to Tacitus, devoted to inhuman superstition, where they decreed it a duty to cover their altars with the blood of their captives and to consult their deities through human entrails. It is interesting that no sacred groves have yet been discovered on Anglesey. However, across the island at a small lake called Llyn Cerrig Bach, over 150 Iron Age votive offerings were discovered in 1942. One such item was an iron gang chain used for holding captive slaves. It has been suggested that this piece gives evidence to Tacitus's description of the human sacrifices by the Druids. What it certainly does tell us is that there was a long tradition of Druidic practices on the island before the Roman invasion. The addition of emotive anti-Druid language that Tacitus uses is common amongst 1st century Roman accounts. This was an era when Rome was attempting to stamp out traditional belief systems and behaviour. The first invasion of Anglesey by the Romans was disrupted just after they had started to garrison the island, when disturbing news reached Suetonius Paulinus. In the south, a fierce band of natives, led by a warrior queen, were attacking Roman cities. Boudica had momentarily saved Anglesey. The island remained free from Roman rule for the next 17 years, until under a new governor, the Romans threatened Anglesey again. Gnaeus Julius Agricola became governor of Britain in around 77 AD. When he arrived, he discovered that the Ordovices tribe of North Wales had destroyed the Roman cavalry stationed in their territory. This led to an offensive campaign against the tribe, which was successful. Agricola turned his attention to the subjugation of Anglesey. Building the fortress at Segontium, modern Carnarvon, which lay close to the main coastal roads, while also guarding access to the Menai Strait, Agricola launched an attack. Wary of the dangers the waters possessed, Agricola summoned his most experienced soldiers and swam across. The area near Llyn in the south of Anglesey, some 4 miles northeast of Carnarvon, has been suggested as the landing point for perhaps both Roman invasions. The native people of the island, expecting any threat to come by boat, naval armament or assault by sea, were taken by surprise, and the Romans very quickly won. After this victory, Anglesey remained under Roman rule for 3 centuries, until the Romans pulled out of the whole of Britain in the 5th century AD. Evidence of Roman military sites on the island come in the form of a single fortlet, discovered in 1990 through the use of aerial photography. The Cemlyn Cropmark, which is thought to have been built post-invasion, overlooks Cemlyn Bay, an excellent landing place on the north of the island. Here were found 2 coins dating to the reigns of Nerva, emperor from 96 to 98 AD, and Hadrian, 117 to 138 AD, suggesting use of the site in at least the 1st and 2nd centuries. The Romans continued to govern from the fort at Carnarvon, and for the rest of their time in this area of Wales, there is little written. The Romans had subdued the native population and stamped out the Druidic presence, leaving us to wonder, speculate, and imagine what life was like for the people of Anglesey during the occupation.